Um, as I have said many, many times, this is political philosophy. This is not politics. As many other people get irritated that politics start going in direction where I would not like to see it, and it is really depressing because I tend to be because I'm wasting enough time and effort to bring my political philosophy. I feel almost offended. It feels almost offensive. It ends up that you want to actually reach your own perception of how you see the world, and you want obviously and you end up thinking that it is in your rights to somehow, or that you would to fight eventually even for that rights to bring that picture of how you see the world. It is not political party, it is the way how you want to see the world. It becomes world view actually, and you fight for your world view. It is exactly like that, and I will continue pushing my world view, not the political or national separatism. In that perspective, I'm going to question today ultimately how far we can allow various nations to go away with taking over the world, or by appropriating, by insisting on their national protocol, they actually end up destroying the world view. Now, how far we can accept today national perspective to take over world perspective, and how correct that is. Many times I have said everything should start from world perspective and then goes to national perspective. It cannot be other way around. If it is other way around, you're going to end up in the world where each nation is going to drag it on their side. And that is not how world should be. World should be equally as a nation. That is, as when you do whatever we do in our lives, it will need to be very much respectfully following the definition of integrity. So on this planet, integrity doesn't start from a nation or from a person. It starts from planetary integrity. Everything should start from planetary integrity, and then where we also, as I have properly delivered my constitutional word, we also recognize what are the most important aspects in our living in this realm. We further on start charting the national integrities, and via individual integrity, and via, of course, understanding all of these matters as a planetary integrity, in planetary context, in a context of life itself, as that is what we do on this planet. Deliver life. This is planet for life, not planet for one or two people getting ahead of anyone else. It is, and when you end up by how all of this is going on, you end up with one or two or three people doing what they want in their life. You end up thinking we are not something here we are not doing correctly. That is not how we should end up getting into. That is not what we should receive as outcome. Not one or two or three people, or I don't know, 5, 10, whatever people getting away with something. This is a planet for life, of humanity. And when you spell that on constitutional levels, or some kind of planetary constitutional levels, then somehow guides you how things should be going and how things should not be going. And you know also how to act and how to react when certain things get wrong. But you chart it, you spell it at the beginning, you state it properly, and somehow impose it over people as some kind of information that they need to take to also accept it as a guideline, and how they should think about this planet and how they should employ themselves on this planet. When that many people step up above anyone else on this earth, that's symptomatic, that's not normal, and that's obviously to do with some kind of remains of some kind of very egocentric platforms at earlier times, where things were happening in very much by driver of some very egocentric people that are obviously not enough also wise, or that egocentricity happens as some kind of sickness or abnormality, not as a matter, much more as a matter of some kind of physical configuration, rather than as a matter of consciousness and awareness and perception. It is as when something exists as a matter of irrational. I'm going to find again a protocol of animals, and why animals are predators, are because they're driven by instincts of their own self maintenance, of survival. Predators are driven by instinct of survival. And I think that's the main problem here that we have where is the problem of humanity actually, because humanity actually obviously derives from the animal shapes and emerges out of animal shapes, and ultimately what human end up fighting within its own protocol is the instinct of a predator. Instinct of a predator is also very egocentric because it is driven by self-preservation and survival. By survival. So we are fighting today as a conscious human with this kind of consciousness, when it's established what I want to do, where I want to go, how I want to accomplish something. Drive it even on the level of humanity, charting it even on the level of humanity. And then on the other side, you have this kind of completely predatory instinct of a survivor, of a instinct of survivor. Total no animalized predatory instinct of survivor. That still exists within the human dimension, and fights, or we need as a humanity, as a protocol humanity, we need to discuss, to see that matter like that, to recognize that protocol human is having that problem, and then to deal with that problem. It is irrelevant what sorts of manifestations are going to happen or emerge out of that instinct of survivor and of human predator. That is next question: what are all going to be manifestations of that basic instinct, and how it's going to hide itself in various narratives and various cultural statements. But the fact is that in substance, that is what sits there. The survival instinct of a predator. On the other side, you see that certain humans have accomplished or exist in higher consciousness, where they perceive the entire system, and they think about functioning of the entire system. and when they engage themselves into assisting the protocol to happen to be realized. And there is no any other way how we can say this. There is no absolutely any other way how we can say this. What follows next is to establish that who here have more right to speak and decides, and who have less right to speak and decides on behalf of the entire planet when the consequences of their actions affect larger region or the entire planet. This is the ultimate question. This is what I'm raising up today. This is the level of discussion I deliver today, and this is my ultimate question to each of you out there, either on personal or on national level. And you see how Israel thinks. That's not normal. That's not civilizational. That is not how either human, either state can possibly think about anything. And if someone wants to sell that as some kind of latest norm of some kind of ultimate correctness, it is simply wrong and wrong and wrong. What stands behind that is a predator of an animal. That's all. That's all. That's all that stands there. Complete predator of an animal. Complete instinct of a survival and dominance of a predator, of an animaloid human. I wouldn't go into animaloidness or humanoidness. I would go into the fact that human protocol as itself withhold the element of instinct of a predator, withhold predatory protocol of instinct of survival, of survivor instinct. And in substance, we as a society, as a culture, will need to deal with it. Either when you chart the principles of political correctness or of cultural correctness, or political correctness. And here I'm going to start, of course, the best way to understand how far you can go with nation. There is no any other way how you can chart that. But first, charting a planet. Only when you chart a planet. Well, first you need, like, whatever you're doing, community, or you imagine you need to organize again your company. You start with the integrity of all of the operations you need to do, right? And then you establish the departments based on functionality. In case of the planet, you establish the logic of national identity and national functionality based on terrain, on how much, on what are the needs of the population living on certain territory. So you basically assess the functionality of the planet by assisting each of the regions and the population living there with what they need for life. I can't see any other system being managed in any other way. And even less I can understand how far this world went into managing the planet in a separatist matter. And listen now, there are people, and they continue to think of separatist approach of multipolar, they would call it multipolar world, which is really hard to understand what exactly they want to say here. Versus unipolar world. Now, first of all, there is a context when this statement would make sense, and then when this statement stop making sense. Like in when we talk about business organization, there is degree where this entire matter is going to make sense for the defining the planetary practice. And then when you need to focus about functioning of any of certain department, you would need certain kind of independent status, right? Yes, but only when you understand the position of that department within the overall functioning of the company, right? So this is not one or another, and that's a very wrong question. It's very wrong way how someone sets that multipolar or unipolar. It's wrong way of discussing the entire matter. It is not one or another. We call it like in a company. It's going to be company perspective or department perspective. Will depend what we are talking about. Depends what we are talking about. I'm really not going to waste more time. I think that this is perfectly clear. It's perfectly clear that even when someone sets this kind of questions, they're setting them just to continue to bring further confusion rather than understanding. It is not unipolar or multipolar world. It is that when you discuss whatever protocol, we will need to understand first the protocol, and then we discuss the independent units of that protocol. And it is not one or another. But there are aspects that will be in association with planetary perspective, and there are aspects that are going to be in association with national or regional perspective. For God's sake. And also I can't see that anything here has to do with blaming people. It is not about blaming people. It is about stop hunting people. On this planet, hunting people is still going on. And because hunting of people is still going on, of course, blaming of people is one of the major ways how actually hunting of people end up being excused. I can't possibly also understand that when I bring this level of discussion and someone includes name and surname as a matter of responsibility. I mean, seriously? After everything we are charting here, one person is going, what, we are still after crucifying Jesus here? For God's sake. You know, I think that you are actually bluntly boring. Yes, bluntly boring. Think of better excuse than continuing to play collective idiots. Collective idiots. I'm not going to waste my time for talking to collective idiots here. Is my unique talent is that I'm tuned within this world consciousness, which means that in my sense of normality, I am on that level of consciousness. That is not I need to push myself to think like that, but I am thinking like that. Which means that I am like that bird in Switzerland, yes, correctly, with my mind there, constantly reminding everyone else about something. So my normality is thinking on that level. I'm not thinking community level, I'm not thinking national level, I'm not thinking city level, I'm planetary level. And also I, as anyone else, expect things to be in order. And when they're not in order, I feel like it is affecting my own sense of balance and normality. And also when I hear someone pointing out a person for a guilt or a nation for a guilt, I immediately say that as offensive, because it is not, we are not in correct room here. The correct room is a planet. I mean, there are 100 nations in a planet, and now Ukraine wants to go somewhere. Who on earth is Ukraine? You mean the world wants to go somewhere? You mean the world wants to go somewhere? I will accept. I will find even offensive when each time people start from national perspective to discuss problem, when each time is much more normal to start from planetary perspective. Well, I'm not going to accept Ukraine is not going. It's not just Ukraine. Ukraine is not Ukraine. First of all, Ukraine is Catholic country, and also Ukraine is, to a great extent, and also Ukraine is part of Europe. And also Ukraine is occupied with foreign army out there. And also Ukraine is territory where West confront East, and where what is American influenced political stage confronts Eastern influenced political stage. And also America is not just Donald Trump. America is actually White House. Yes, technically America will never be, it will never be going to be enough to understand the world in its present times via one person in any aspect. When you speak planet, is going to be going much more into collective. It's not Donald Trump, and it's not America, it's White House. It's actually White House. And it is therefore conflicting line is Western politics, or White House in this case scenario, versus Eastern versus Russia. That is what's happening in Ukraine. White House versus Russia. A reason might be actually resources, and the resources of Russia are very much associated with resources in Middle East. So someone see Russia actually as a problem to reach Middle East and confiscate and control Middle East. So it is not that much about Russia, I would say, but it is about Russia and Middle East, Russia and Iran. It is about Russia and it is about Iran. If someone wants to weaken Russia, it's because someone wants to get hands over Iran, because Iran is one of the principal matrix territories on the planet. Principal matrices for certain bio-identities. They would call resources. And when that bio-identity combined with short human bio-identity, it gets the number one formula human for humanity. It's like you get Formula One as Formula One protocol. Formula One protocol somewhere in Central Europe, right? The entire fight is for Formula One. It's right there in front of our eyes, everything. So it's not about Ukraine, it's not about Zelensky, it's about Formula One. First of all, who is holding it at the moment? Obviously, it seems Russians and the crew. And on the other side, the other are just holding the theater. And they're just not happy just holding the theater. They want to hold the factory as well. And the point is that this work emerges arguing that none of these matters can be question of splitting between the territories, but question of planetary management. Either the theater, that is the Westlands, either the factory, that is Eastlands, will need to be all of that will need to be matter of managing the planet. It cannot be one or another or someone or one part of the world taking it over, but then it's multipolar world. Well, certainly it's going to be unipolar by not being unipolar, and that is what we would not like to happen, even less. World is unipolar, and it should be managed as unipolar by all of the nations, that is by protocol United Nations. Where I'm going to question also the place where that building is. It's too much on the west. It should be on the central part of the planet. But at this stage, we can't talk about dividing the planet and then one half of the planet taking the command. Since we established that this planet actually has something very much unilateral, and that is the protocol human, which is already unilateral. You have to manage it unilaterally. You cannot manage the protocol in some kind of multipolar world. What on earth that means? When you have unilateral protocol, human, you have unilateral protocol, you have to have unilateral management of the protocol, which is not just one nation going on way, because that's not unilateralism in planetary perspective. Unilateralism in planetary perspective is United Nations protocol. It is one center, United Nations. But in the way how that center should be existing, that is like one office, a center office, that's like headquarter to companies with various departments in various parts of the world. You still need to have headquarters. You can't run the business. Oh, this is exactly the same. You can't run a planet if you don't have a headquarter of a planet, which is therefore United Nations, which will need to be United Nations, literally all nations, compulsory membership there, and very much carefully designed the weight of a vote, because you have to compare now the vote of a state as it is Monaco, for example, with the weight of state as it is USA or Russian Republic, or any of the bigger states, somewhere in Africa, for example, where they are going to hold all together tightly as African continent. And then that is why you have to confront it with European continent, or with Asian, eventually split Asia, East Asia, West Asia, or Middle East, as known more, America's North, South America. Only you can have Africa. Only then you can have Africa. Africa dictates very much that other territories will need to have much more tighter definition in their regions as well, because United Nations cannot function otherwise. In any case scenario, compulsory leadership would make enough sense. When it is compulsory leadership, then it's going to make sense. I think that number of states in Africa are matching the number of states in America. The fact is that America comes with one voice, one voting right, and Africa comes with 50 voting rights. And that's a problem. Or Russia comes with one voting rights, and Middle East comes with, or Asia comes with certainly 20, 30 voting rights. And when situation is like that, you can't exactly speak of United Nations as that much of a functioning body, because in certain perspective it becomes dysfunctional. That is why it has been invented the big 5-6-7 on basis of actual civilizational development, because the logic is that technically they withhold responsibility for overall civilizational development. Although such approach is far from being correct and end up in the world which, as it is today, enormously impoverished by the top that continue to basically technically take over the planet with them, not just civilization but the entire planet technically, and see and leave everyone outside of the planetary mercy. And that is simply wrong. I think it makes much more sense to give vote to each of, to have much more liberated function of republics in to make USA really federation, to federalize USA, to give independent status to each of the republics there, to have like Federation of Republics of USA, and then each of them to have votes in United Nations. It's going to make more sense actually than to run United Nations as big 5, 6, and 7. I think it makes more sense. I think it makes more sense to give to each state in America much more independence, actual independence, and to give them voting rights. And similarly in Russia, I would assume equally there would have been at least 50 federational units in Russia. They will need to be much more independent, to be independent actually, to have each of them to have its own voting rights in United Nations. And then we have this logical United Nations management. We also can actually somehow maybe reduce. I think that the size of the size of Africa is quite large continent, you know, so you don't have to confront it with just with a state. Africa can be confronted with another with suitable size of continent. For example, we talk about Asia to have 50 states. If I just see the map here and see the proportions of the parts of the continent, you will notice here that half of Asia would be basically in similar size of Africa. That is, to get more specific, eastern part of Asia, which means that eastern part of Asia also require much more division, further division of the regions into smaller independent units that are going to deal with a uniqueness of their problems living in certain region, and would have therefore that leverage of having independent voting rights and insisting on their issues. As when they are part of bigger unit, then very often it can get neglected, the issues of each of the parts equally, of each of the parts of the region. It is similar very in USA. You have Washington and New York going, and Hollywood going away in a couple of other cities, going away with the entire size of USA. It is like entire size of USA works for where New York and Washington and Hollywood would like to go. Basically, they are colonizing America. But they're colonizing America. Also, they call themselves Americans. Basically, they are colonizing the rest of the American territory. Literally. Now, if you grant independent status to each of these states, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be completely different. They're going to go with their independent status. And that's going to bring forward and to give equal weight to their issues, as are weighted issues for New York, for New Yorkers of New York, or for Washingtonians of Washington, and so on and so on. It is very much somehow very, very subordinated relationship that you find here of any other state versus these central states as it is Washington, New York thing, Hollywood. You notice that entire America basically has been confiscated, colonized, utilized by where these three mega cities would like to go. And basically stands for America occupied, rather. There's just next step to find these mega companies that basically are taking it further on their, taking everything further on their side. It is rather natural progression. And I would say all of the preconditioning for for things to escalate in that direction are set, especially on American soil, and in the way how politically America has been ended to be configured. So basically, the big 10 companies are the most logical progression of how this world functions. Further centralization, further and further centralization of powers. And at some point is going to reach that critical momentum when it can easily explode. Now, that is not going to defend enough human being, intelligent being. We should be today intelligently preventing such explosion to occur, and that can only be done by employing what I do here, that is intelligent perspective employed. In that context, I can hear someone saying, we are going to do, okay, we are going to do it that way. It is offensive. It is like someone is laughing in my face or something. It is as someone is provoking me, maybe as well. So I'm supposed to continue to play the horse now. Well, I don't mind answering to any of such statement. If such statement really exists, and if some people sit out there that really think that way about what I do here, which I'm very certain they do, of course I'm going to find that offensive. And I'm going to find that simply wrong. And inappropriate. Yes. Accordingly, who are these people to continue to talk to me like that? Is that, are they in England? Is that Buckingham Palace itself? Is that Buckingham Palace itself? I'm going to find today United Nations responsible to prevent Buckingham Palace to stop dealing with the entire situation like that, to stop stealing my work, to stop claiming my work, and to stop being disrespectful. And to the extent that that is commanding United Nations as well, the rest of the nations will start pushing upon this. Buckingham Palace, as it is right now, with me being outside of it, with me not being in control of the situation, and allowing someone else to lavishly benefit on the account of my work. I can't accept that. I'm sorry, but I can't accept that. Even if you exist as a collective out there, as a collective bees, it can't be done in the way how you have done it. Simply, it can't be done like that. It is wrong. It's being lost the critical momentum here. What human is versus collective. If it doesn't work for me, how on earth it can work for you? So therefore be reminded, I'm still claiming United Nations myself, and I am claiming England for purpose of delivering this work when that happens. Accordingly, I see England in liability. As I can see, they actually have nothing against it. I think they have nothing against it. I think the ones that have against it are the ones that have been accommodated very much to use my work as some kind of bunch of bees and live and maintain their world on premises of my earnings rather than functioning themselves as a productive unit. And I have to see them as a part of the problem. Now that I deliver this planetary perspective, and when we need to deal with that many important matters of the planet, I can't accept these people to end up also to command me rather than me to command them. Well, they're being rewarded for what I do. It is violation of God principle. They're violating God principle. I'm sorry. It can't go like that anymore. England accepts to provide assistance. This is world perspective. I'm not going to skip you, or I'm not going to not notice you when I'm born with that perspective. You are on my mind every day. However, in different way. And my way will need to be respected. Because it makes more sense. And your way is predatory and it can't be accepted. It can't be accepted that you appropriate my work, my results of my work, and then employ it how you like to be. Can the rest of the planet accept that kind of alliance, somewhere from New York and Washington, on better terms? So that is why they are providing that corridor, because there is common denominator between Serbia and Macedonia and Washington and New York. And Israel, obviously. So why America is that much vested in supporting Israel is because New York and Washington are supporting Israel. And also because America is Washington and New York. Now, Americans will need to understand the size of their problem. Is because the size of American problem is first and foremost, therefore the problem is in America. And in the very fact that Washington and New York are controlling all of the America, recklessly as a conquistors, not as the one that take care of America, but as the one that do not give a damn about America, the one that are selling out America in the way how they're selling out myself, the one that are occupying America, and the one for whom America is exactly what I am for them, and that is a foreign object they don't give a damn about. That is the problem of America. So yes, to talk about civil war in America will make much more sense than to make war with Russians. At least you solve something. You have to fight for your Americans, because at the moment you don't have it. And you're going to be extinct race very soon, or robotized, or who knows what, if you just don't start standing for yourself. You have to fight Washington and New York yourself, and Hollywood. You have to fight them yourself in the way how you fought 9/11. You have to fight now Washington and New York, and you have to fight Hollywood. That is where we are right now. And the world will need to fight the two glues, the glue called Serbia and Macedonia, on the very fact that they went that far to appropriate my work, like two cacadus, like two imbeciles, like two clueless idiots. And two clueless idiots cannot surface entire planet. An entire planet cannot be helpless versus two clueless imbeciles. And maybe the third one would be New Zealand itself. It is another question how the third one, that is New Zealand slash backed by some kind of Irish elements of Britannia, are actually commanding the two gadgets in the protocol of bastards of Roman imperialism. And how far they have not stopped being bastards of Roman imperialism. Now look how Roman imperialism is being treated in America by the Steve Bannon department, which is permanent way of how America and White House of America has been run by Prime Tribunal Society of Britannia. I mean, we still have their reckless Normans controlling the world. And reckless Normans are continue to control, actually, very much the two bastards of Roman imperialism, and via them and Israel as a third bastard, actually to control the entire Middle East. As we speak, the three bastards are being controlled by Britannia. Now, I'm not sure that we can leave this as it is, because now anyone else can come there. Even Africa figured out in last century, obviously, was the secret formula, or formula number one, to control the world. And it's time to notice there is formula 2 as well. That is a woman and a mother. And that formula can be actually more powerful. That formula can actually be self-standing. And that formula, when that formula gets activated, you might end up into dictatorship. For good. Artians. For good. Because that is where we are up to by now. Artians, you will need to be told still what to do. I mean, can you imagine if someone is not there to do things for you, so you can continue to play puppets? That would be impossible. You want to continue to play puppets, someone will need to be provider. Or that someone is dominion or dictatorship, because it is based on dicta, the order. Dictating the order is dictatorship. And it is not negative word. It is word of taking care of someone, taking care of you. And that is where my name comes, as I care. So we are perfectly matching each other. I can notice that as well. Artians, we are perfect match to each other. Artians, salute! Salute! No, look how I have been grown in 30 minutes. From a donut into a stick called sword. That's alchemy or what? However, I'm going to notice, of course I have to notice that, and everyone will need to notice, we have to notice that it is not correct to call the principle one of the most temple-related territories planetary bastards of someone. And as I'm using considerable amount of anger here, it will need to be noticed that we have total control of the ancient plateau of the planet, of the central ancient plateau of the planet, by Western tribunal population, and that has not changed to the present days. that population, it is much more on the native earlier predatory stages, where human doesn't happen even yet, and where predatory here, it is not about homosexualism, it is about victims of sexual oppression, of man predator, of man animal. There is no sex there. It is like in animals. It is, I mean, it's not like human as it's talking about relationship with a man and a woman with a level of love, and when sex actually happens as a result of emotional state of mind, which is human definition of sexual relationship, love, and when you reach the point of need for physical contact, which is mental, but it is also love related. It is, although you might define love as an instinct, in substance, in human civilizational protocols, love becomes a matter of, it is its own subject. It is about bringing, and it is part of bringing human totally on next level in terms of sensitivity, not selfishness, but explaining and trying to understand the mental and the universal kind of level of unity of two different physical, to matching identities within some kind of format or melody of shapes and colors, which in human dimension will need to have its place together, where overall consciousness and civilness and emotionsness and sensitivity of human goes. Where human goes is sensitive intelligence. That is where relationships, especially with women as well, of course, are going, of a man and a woman. That is where all of that is going. And that is why in last century, in any of the previous centuries, you have monumental pieces of love poetry, where capacity, where it is wonderfully described how human reached, what stage human sensitivity and human intelligence reached when it is in question relating in a love relationship, or finding himself, herself in love relationship. That is where human stands, when human, as modern human, evolved, sensitive human, stands when it comes to relationship man and woman. Now, where you find earlier or prime human standing, it is much closer where are the animals. Now, how you can walk these two humans in one same time, in one same protocol? How you can compare these two events? Oh, these are like from different planets. Although it is the same planet. It is, one is the modern human and the other is predatory prime human. And how on earth you can possibly think that you can bring now predatory prime human on the top of the planet? How on earth you could have think that something can happen? Maurice, there's a question for you. How many books you have written about explaining relationship man and woman? Maurice, how many books you have written explaining love between man and a woman? Maurice, how many books so far you have written on the subject? New Zealand, that's your question for yourself as well. Australians, same question. Britons, I can bring that question for you as well. Entire Westlands, without Europeans, take out Europeans. Americans, that's a question for you as well. I'm looking forward to your liberation when you are ready. However, I'm not going to see my aunt. Equally, I can't find my aunt sitting somewhere in Germany, supervising my work, presuming that she is servantee, she is much more than anything to do with poetry or music. She excelled in Macedonia that far to surface all of the Macedonia, not by being poetry lover or music lover, by being perfect servant for Germans. I'm certainly good in making cakes and torts and various desserts, but that's not going to surface our human civilization in present times. You're not surface me. You cannot surface me possibly. That aunt cannot possibly surface me. Germany, we all know that. So what on earth do you think you're doing out there? Stamping Macedonia? Would it not be a bit of a bite for someone as Germany? I mean, that entire history, that entire region. I think Germans have been found on the level of simpler men, as similarly as would be most of the native Western population, happening more on the simpler side. Undoubtedly, there is plenty of Renaissance and poetry in Germany, but that is not what is driving Germany. What is driving Germany is considerable amount of robustness. Even Russians are more sensitive than are Germans. And that appeared to be the main problem in my life. That kind of robustness from positions of Central Europe, Poland, Germany, some kind of robust body, surfacing my work, presuming it is higher consciousness without being tested. But the approach employed, which is elemental rather than of any kind of political refinement or political complexity, cannot surface my work. I'm going to say, therefore, I'm going to notice the historic region from which I originate is much more complex than Central Europe altogether, if we are going to use the present criteria and taking into account that one good percentage of Central Europe was slaughtered in last century. It's very hard even to talk about Central Europe today, after slaughter that took place in last century. And as much as South Mediterranean lands that I associate with my birthplace still continue to be rather provision given to them, or imagining them what potential they would to bring rather than what they are bringing it, as that potential equally went somewhere else, dispersed all over the planet. It's very hard to make the trajectory of something that's not there, in the numbers even, in which someone would be convinced that such statement can be taken seriously. All we can see today is, you're right, an individuals getting on surface, and individuals as some kind of unique residual of species that once upon a time have been existing there, as some kind of residual of artifacts, are delivering what they are delivering. What they are delivering is that my aunt cannot surface this work. She can play guardian, which I'm going to highly appreciate. But we have to be very careful how far one can go away with such situation of supervising and forgetting it is a bodyguard, not leadership. Because when you see Europeans, they don't behave as supervisor, they behave as they are controlling the territory. And that's what's wrong when they generate something in such artificial manner, some kind of wrong mental trajectory, and then play the role as well as it is real. And so projected via, distillated via the servantee position of my aunt in shape of Germany. And if that is how we should find Germany on these territories, or I should find Germany on these territories, I first am going to say, no, that's the wrong way how you play Germany on these territories. Here I step in entire Europe, center of Europe, and what I'm going to say again, because of that nationalism that you constantly drive above the regional, you all find yourself in default because you miss the perspective here. If you just allow yourself away from such over polarized approaches to first understand the topic, we still need to get European identity first and then defend it. And if you defend wrong European identity, you have not defended Europe enough. Because there is not going to be future of Europe. Defense means defending what you need to defend. And in order to understand what you need to defend, you need to understand what you need to defend. How many times I have said, defense makes sense if you just identify first what on earth you're defending. What on earth you're defending? And you start from your personal properties. And you step away from being animal shape of a human. There is no trajectory at all what Europe is supposed to be. And then to defend it. Not supposed to be, but what Europe was. What Europe was. What Europe was. We need to defend what Europe was, and then we need to also return it as well. And that will take time. As today we are just in Europe charting the grounds again after all of that devastation in previous century. The next step will be to identify what you actually need to defend as Europeans. What would be the trajectory here of European identity? Excuse me, but politics is kind of artistry. If politics is not artistry, then it would not be standing where it's supposed to stand. It's not like you are playing some kind of butchery department out there. Politics is artistry, not butchery. And I'm not sure that has been understood today across the planet. So let's understand today metaphysical again as invisible as what would be consciousness reflecting on the physical rather than physical on the consciousness. Although I have been talking very much about the connection of the two, I have been also talking about genetics. But what happens when you focus on genetics? Basically, that is what you are talking about. You are talking about the consciousness, or what has happened there reflected within the physical. And living stamp on the physical. That is why today we talk genetics, and it is separate field on its own. We are not anymore here talking about spirits. Now we are talking genetics, and we are certain that is much more correct approach how we are going to understand consciousness itself. And that is also in the same time perfect example where actually the consciousness engraves itself or reflects itself on the genetics. Now let's pay attention that in substance we still end up talking about consciousness rather than history without a meaning or as some kind of matter of historic record, but we don't go further to elaborate why that will bring now higher weight and in what context. So it is one thing to say there are prime societies and there are old societies everywhere. But second event to discuss how far on certain territories older societies in previous times managed to deliver more substantial civilization that would manage to walk away from its predatory stages. As very much today, we are on that level of assessment of our historic heritage and heritages and the meaning and significance of historic heritage. In that context, I'm enclosing here with intensity, which I have been recently talking about, I'm enclosing now the dimension, or very often someone would talk about depthness, in-depth, when you say in-depth analysis, although I would be speaking here actually about the dimension of where someone is going to bring the subjects or how far someone is going to develop the subject of discussion. How far? So what is in depth is rather spaciousness or dimension or perspective. Very often we would to talk about perspective. And then I have just said today to you, my perspective by default is planetary. You know what that means as well? Well, it means that we are talking about historic setting of either by professional function or by historic occurrence, where it was much more logical to think of the world as entire event than to start from some kind of much more local, or when local is as big as it would be world, and it would be played as the world itself. That is, we would be speaking about larger kingdoms that would have been understood as a world. And that is how I find Russia again, not only by a soul, but by a dimension. And here I'm just going to question how much I'm playing here cats running around the earth rather than not confronting what is right in front of my nose. And that is that there was something beyond the very fact that somewhere at the beginning of 80s, Buckingham Palace invited the newly elected President Putin then to handle him as a matter of goodwill, certain artifacts that has been considered of Russian origin, Russian ownership, military related, that ended to be in hands of monarchy of England. To be certain, I'm very sure that they have been talking actually about Yugoslavia, because in 90s started war in Yugoslavia. And they would be rather talking about Romanovs. Soon after, it happened formal burial of Romanovs. And I'm very sure that what they have been handling, what Buckingham Palace was handling to Russians is returning to Russians the entire aura or the house of Romanovs. They have been actually returning to Russians the house of Romanovs. Now let's focus on what would be in meaning of house of Romanovs in terms of genetics as it was last century, very much going in pyramids of Egypt, and all of the scientists have been going there, and it was all about bringing artifacts elsewhere in Europe. What would be the parallel dimension to such events if we enclose genetics, which also developed as a science very much in last century, somewhere in central Germany and some in central Europe rather? As always, the top scientific centers of Europe for a longer period of time have been Central Europe, and that is why I think Americans hit Central Europe with Germany, because it was the most developed center of science. Now, was it any other concern? Where there have been any other concerns? Probably have been other concerns as well about humane side, as I believe the science in last century went too far into some kind of dark chambers, and obviously someone needed to shake it a bit. Nevertheless, we found ourselves still very much in house of genetics today, or on the subject of genetics. And today I'm very much pushing in the direction of regulating the entire field, because I found it critically important to preserve the sanity of this entire world, the meaning of this entire world, and what we understand under this world today, which is, of course, civilizational parameter as well. I certainly would assume I'm not alone, considering that this matter of regulating that field is one of the most important subject of today. And that we are not talking here about atomic bombs, we are talking about historic heritage houses. I'm going to find governments very much being disrespectful to the size of the flag, to the size of their flag and to the size of their history and to the size of their currency, if they continue, governments, if they continue to talk about atomic bombs and atomic weapons, but not about historic heritage houses, because they cannot afford, as they have stepped as some kind of King Kong all over historic heritage houses. Now that it has been revealed as a result of how science developed in last century, of course, that we talk about genetic houses after all. For how long governments are going to stand there as some kind of cork on the bottle of wine, rather than to admit that they are overstepping the entire time dimension of existence of the state. Very much they consider themselves patrons. To be manager or in charge of something is not to deny or override that very something, which in this case scenario is a state. If by managing a state, governors suffocate the meaning of state very much, then what kind of governor that would be, that's going to consume the very subject they're governing? The governments have been found in wrong today. And one of the main reasons why I hold to Buckingham Palace today and the monarchy protocol, no matter how obsolete it is because that is my main opposition in my fight with governments. And all in going in direction, of course, of where my sentiment is bringing me, where my sense of my own identity is bringing me. And that is to bring this level of consciousness, which then I find how I find it and where I find it. And it becomes protocol itself. This level of political consciousness becomes a history, and then becomes historic protocol. And that is how I reach monarchies as a historic protocol, as a protocol which refer to historic identity, which governments are not reaching. Governments do not reach that point. They're simply not getting there. No matter what is going to be the name of their political party, somewhere in England or wherever, they are not reaching the fabric, the subject matter upon which government will need to act. Because nothing here starts with governments and the way how they are formatted and how they function. Government is executive power, and no one should give to governments more weight than what that is. Executive power, executive management of the nation. Education, which is today more or less now international standard. Social, medical care, already international standard. Maintaining of cities and the lands, international standards. Agriculture, already international standards. These are science-related standards. And of course, the normative of such science-related standards, which governments will need to handle still, exist within certain international bodies that are going to govern very specific fabric of what is, either we talk about green agenda or we talk about global warming or whatever it is. They are highly professional issues where it is now rather scientific level, where it is within the construct of United Nations, like professional bodies, where these movements will continue to happen very much within the management of governments, because they are representing their nations, and people will be using the governments to stand for a variety of issues they're going to find affecting their daily life. And all of that is day after day managing of life. It is very much executive. It is all government. What I do here is something else. And that something else lost its stage altogether. That will need to be noticed. That something else that I do here lost its stage. And I'm not going to accept to happen within some kind of botanical gardens of Britannia, because what I do here is not that much about botanicals garden of Britannia either. Although maybe Britons are using still that interface to discuss politics. Elsewhere in the world, as I'm talking about international standards now, politics ended to be discussed as its own protocol, using its own scientific development and developing as a science on its own. Politics is its own science. You cannot use now botanical science in politics or as reference to politics. Maybe in most prime times that would make some sense in the most earlier times, but in present times you can't surface any more serious political discussion with such rhetoric. So it's time to notice that botanics now is returning to botanics, exclusively botanics, and politics become where monarchies went to go, where religion went as well, where it is the consciousness, where it is the human protocol, and where it is the history of building a civilization as well. These are very serious subjects, and botanical gardens are not going to be good enough to top up the conversation. So it's time to move on. It's time to move on. In that respect, already this planet is moving in direction granting its own field to various professionals and very talented people that finding themselves realized in their field, in their professional inclination, their talents for various professional functions. Either it is energetic healing, either it is botanical, naturopath protocol, either it is agriculture directly, or whatever it is now, specializing into various professionally driven suitable university existing there to assist that further development. We are moving, I'm very certain, in that direction, in very, very correct development. What continue to be the most troubled zone is governing itself and political science or political philosophy, which is obviously surfacing governing itself, and would therefore belong to different house or different function, and that is conceptual political thinking or constitutional political thinking. Although I'm not going to drop from political philosophy, because somehow here I replace religion with something that would look more as a Buddhism, although Buddhism went too much into religion as well. I'm bringing it, I would like to bring it much more on the scientific field, which is to deal with much closer to actual state of matters, as science is trying to understand rather than to worship, as Buddhism is. Closer to worship something than to understand. I want to bring it more in this scientific aspect, not only to try to push that much into understanding it as much as I would like to liberate it from intervention of various protocols that becomes rather framing and by over-preserving something, basically overtaking it from what would exist as its own protocol. After all, what we are talking about is not going to be Buddhism, neither we can call it Buddhism. We're going to call it bioenergy, right? And then we also will try to bring some kind of socio-political dimension to it, and then becomes political philosophy or socio-political philosophy and conceptual thinking. But very much it is not, Buddhism is over-commercialized, and it can only be executive now, but it cannot be a headquarter, because it is too much executive, because it is too much branching on its own criteria, and in such way it is trading off the scientific side of it. Now what I do here is trying to deliver human within the constitutional parameters, and human consciousness and human energy is part of it. And although it's colliding with Buddhism, religion, and similar matters, medicine even, when you speak about constitutional protocol as a human protocol, in human dimension, you end up thinking about these matters in much more organic and more natural way. So that is what I want, where I want to return this entire subject matter to its most authentic existence. Before we chart it within certain social framework, which I would then rather call protocol human, and then constitution of realm art, where then principal protocol is protocol human. And then you bring the discussion, and you can go in specific as far as you go, but it's going to be confiscated within protocol human, not protocol Buddhism. And that's important. That's important to accept now that kind of recategorization of these subjects. Because Buddhism is not owning human dimension, but very easily you can find yourself in India thinking that India now all of a sudden can pull certain higher rights to discuss even appropriate entire subject matter of human consciousness. Like they qualify to surface any discussion on it because they know most about it, but then becomes politically appropriated. Even if someone includes higher language, higher knowledge on certain matters, you cannot appropriate it politically if it belongs to protocol human, which is common denominator to the entire planet. You might give in certain kind of priesthood on the subject matter, being human energy and human consciousness. You might be given priest level, India, but you cannot be declared as owner of the subject. Now that's very important differentiation that one will need to make. Now, I really don't know how I ended from Russia to India, but genetically, certainly, I connect the two branches. I have been talking about spaciousness and consciousness. And then I wanted to point out that there is no place where we deal with these matters. As governments, although want to take over everything, in substance they're dealing with very little, and everything becomes rather not attended than attended. And I was trying to find out where would be the place where we are going to bring these subjects, and then I was trying to explain what is the subject that we need protocol for, that is going to be therefore managing protocol or governing protocol. And we are talking therefore about protocol human altogether. I'm bringing it as a constitutional matter, and I'm enclosing it to United Nations as a counseling office of United Nations, and then I enclose here Constitution of Earth, and then I enclose here protocol human as a first premise. That is how I found it, legally crafted properly. In that context, each of the nations become part of planet Earth, how it should be understood, and each of the nations become connected with something that exists as a common denominator for all of the nations, and that is protocol human. And that is what continues to be there for that common denominator that brings us together in one building or in one room, on one round table of Earth. And that is protocol human itself. I'm going to ask various genetic mutations that has happened out of protocol human not to be concerned or not to give up on the protocol human, and then to think that they have something to lose, because to the extent that they hold protocol, that they have protocol human with them, they are humans, and that they should stop behaving as they are not humans. That's a major problem. You are in the shape of human. You are the human. And discuss the matter as a human, because that is where you are. If you are a bird, then discuss it as a bird. But if you are not a bird, then why you are discussing it as a bird? That's brainwashing. Because someone is going to tell you are a bird, and now you are going to start defending the birds, the human birds. But you look like a human, and you are a human. It is more like someone is throwing a spell on you than anything else. Someone just made you to think that you are a bird, rather than you are a bird. It's more like hypnosis. It is rather a hypnosis. Now, certain territories, certain regions, people are slimmer because the food is scarce. Because the region is much more of a mountain. They don't have that much of a food. When they find themselves in America, they become nothing of slim that much. I mean, you can hardly find any slim people in America. It's all mega. But when people are under starvation, of course they are going to be slim. Well, it's abundance of or food or scarce food. Major factor in the size of human body. I have impression that this entire planet has been under spell, somewhere from some kind of English aristocracy that invented recently, and that is just recent, invented recently Disneyland, and went on to joke with the rest of the planet. I'm going to ask you all, therefore, belonging to this planet within the protocol human of Earth, to stay comfortably in your skin as a human and defend your human protocol accordingly. The only difference we have to enclose today is the geographic differences, and not any other difference whatsoever, but only geographic difference. Everything else is someone is messing up and joking with humanity. And don't be so easy to buy it. We talk about genetic mutation, but we are still not certain why it is happening. I'm very sure it is happening because of the food we humans tend to eat. And notice, in certain cultures, eating pork, for example, is not accepted. There are certain cultures that do not eat pork. I think, and then there are certain cultures that actually very much, most of the time they eat pork. As for example, in Serbia, my family, my grandfather, they're eating pork all year long. It was not that much affecting my grandfather as much as it's affecting my grandmother, but my grandfather was working from morning to evening, and he certainly could have not afforded to get slim, to get obese, because he was really very pedantic person, and he was really fairly maintaining his land by an example, standard quality. And here it is me, genetics is not a water. I am of such families. When we do something sincerely and thoroughly. But I'm going to say my point was certain territories, for example, eat pork, all and poultry most of the year, especially Central Europe. As a result, you get what you get. In America, mostly they eat beef. And as a result, you have in America that kind of more Elvis Presley kind of protocol. I'm going to argue that it is about all based on the food you eat that is affecting our genetics. And accordingly, eating meat that's going to be, certainly I'm not going to recommend eating human meat, because that's not exactly what we need. We are already humans. You don't need to become human when you are a human. Rather, you need to be careful what you should not be indulging yourself too much, rather than what you need. What you need, you have. So you are going to lose it. It is rather how to maintain it, and for that much, something again, you don't need a brain because you have a brain. You need rather how to stimulate a brain. And what stimulates a brain is when a brain focus on certain subject or certain issue, and then a human devote itself to it, which we don't have problem with. Most of the humans on this planet do not have problem to focus on something and devote to something. The main problem is that they need guidelines to what they should be focusing. That is where leadership becomes critically important, and that is where nothing starts from governments, because governments, notice now what I'm going to say, governments lack perspective. Governments lack perspective in order to tell you where you should be focusing yourself. They themselves lack perspective. They themselves will need to be instructed how they are going to guide you. They themselves will need to be instructed. So where we are going to do that? Once we accept that governments will need to be instructed on the subject of protocol human, we therefore end up talking about house of protocol human. And that is not something that we can call centralized because it is United Nations driven protocol, and it is basically rather incorporating compulsory membership of each of the nations. And I would argue also the location should be much more centered than how it is today. All of that being said, if I zoom into specifics, and I find myself existing as author of this work and bringing this discussion as matter of responsible existence, I have rights to insist suitable office to be given to me. Next question would be where that office would need to be, or how we are going to understand that office in political terms. And in that context, I'm enclosing here identity question, and I'm enclosing the subject matter itself on the next line, and that is protocol human. And what is next very important about protocol human, and that is how we chart our human, which I very often call human of earth, how we chart human of earth. In that context also, we might talk about certain diversity, as there is geographic diversity, which then affect cultural diversity, and then comes human freedom to have right to choice or the right to decide how they want to be and what color they would like to prefer. That's all fine. But when that comes to preceding something, then we tend to choose what we would perceive as the most leading criteria. There is always ambassador to everything. There is always cardinal to everything. There is always king or queen to everything. It is not going to amend your freedom. It's not going to affect your freedom. But when it comes to what's the best of the best, we would all agree there are certain features that still stand higher than any other. And that is where comes this monarchy protocol. I'm talking for that long period of time, more as a stamp house in its meaning, within its meaningfulness, rather than not meaningfulness. And today, as I'm driving it on the planetary level, as surfacing the protocol human altogether, does bring much more general features than national related. So that is what we also need to understand here. Therefore, the diversity in human manifestation and some kind of best of the best or leading features that we need to recognize as leading features when it comes to certifying protocol human. In that respect, of course, I'm going to bring forward moral ground which connects to purity. Purity, innocence, or maybe something that exists a bit more isolated from variety of urban and challenges of much more urbanized lifestyle. Idealism in substance always steps up from a variety of not challenges but also compromises that human will need to do as a result of everyday choices. But then that is why the House of Standards is still there to remind us how far one can compromise and what end up to be compromised. Now, why human will need to be told what is House of Standards? Because the human mind becomes much more complex and may easily end up in some kind of labyrinth situation. If we do not talk about it, if we do not try to organize things, if we do not try to standardize things, we simply can't handle complexity. As a result, organization happens as a way how we deal with various much more complex situations, and we're all aware how far organization is important, either when you run a household, or when you're running a company, or when you're running a community or a state. Organization is vital. Therefore, when dealing with human nature, because it is in question complex matter, we need certain sorting out things. We need to put them in some order, we need to classify them, categorize them, and even certify them. Because it is in question complex nature. Look, it is taking us only almost a decade, even more, to establish that homosexualism is not natural to humankind. Because humankind is more developed species, and each of more developed species exists in two genders. Only the earlier of the species exist in one gender. The later on are all in two genders. And nature happens to deliver its complexity, not simplicity. We recognize more than two colors, more than just few sounds. We are capable to make the most complex pieces of music. Our sensitivity is substantial. The charting of our sensitivity is substantial. Nothing here is to be oversimplified. And our sensitive nature should not confuse us on the most principal features of our identity, as it is physics of our body, which is already defined accordingly. Well, when it comes to psychics, to psychological state, that is where complexity starts, and that is where certain order is required, and certain categorization, so we don't get confused. It is normal to recognize sensitivity of another human being. It is also normal to understand where that sensitivity belongs, and where it makes sense and where it doesn't make sense, where it can develop further into next level and where simply doesn't go. And if human doesn't bring that to the next level where it's supposed to be, that is to deliver its next generation. Excuse me, I'm talking about the standard protocol here. I'm charting human to its highest of the stamp. I'm talking about how it is to be, not how should be and what should be tolerated. But I'm certifying human here. It is by a stamp, by a certification, by a standard, because if you don't deliver that golden standard, then how on earth you would know where it is? 10 years ago, someone was very willing to erase the very golden standard of what human is. And that is why I found important that there should be a place where this discussion should be not just stated like that, but when it would be existing as a statement, as a monument of humanity itself. In that context, I just find myself questioning how far metaphysics can go. into recognizing that I'm going to find still Russia as the most convenient territory where political land, where I can bring human sensitivity to the highest of its developed standards, and still in its very pure form, which you easily lose somewhere in England, where you get taken by the feeling of rivalry, wittiness, and playing out someone and getting on top of something rather than channeling the highest of the standards and its most pure protocol driven certification. England, it is true, lived more than Russia, and sometimes that is not always going to deliver better results. Sometimes you get more of dirt getting out of it than purity that you need as a guideline on these matters. And I just wonder how far upper house it is not really metaphysically sitting exactly on the upper levels of the planet, where you are remotely distanced from where people are much more in some kind of basket of bees rather than house of reason. It is true that this function requires to step up, and I have to notice here equally some kind of cultural aura, so you don't end up being challenged on daily basis and thrown at with rotten tomatoes and with eggs. But where you would be rather understood with some kind of synchronicity of having similar environment, similar surrounding, because this level of consciousness, that is where metaphysics happens again. This level of consciousness requires suitable level of geographic configuration, where things are not going to be that much crowded, where more space is going to allow you to think better, where it is not about the speed, but about dimension. And dimension and speed do not go together with each other, because it doesn't make sense. They're opposite meanings. They mean opposite. They mean different. They're different protocols. Space is duration. Space is statement. Space is existence. Speed is traveling between destinations. Space is one of the destinations. It is a destination itself. It is existence itself. They're two different phenomena, and you can't compare them. You simply can't compare them. You compare them if the two objects are moving, and if two objects mean movement. But if one of the objects is static and means existence, and the other is the one that is moving, then you can't compare them. Existence is not a speed. It is a stamp of existing already. Protocol human is here, existing, delivered, with each new act of creative work, we improve that statement of humanity. But it is a statement of humanity we work on and we improve. Russia is exactly manifesting what I do here in the most perfect way. It is reflecting the space, it is reflecting the distance, it is reflecting the purity, and it is reflecting the complexity. It is a place where you end up certifying and defending human itself, I would argue. It is a stamp where you get reminded, place where you get reminded what human is supposed to be. Each time you find yourself in the wrong direction. I will argue that at some point of time it has been recognized that Russia is too distant, and that in order for someone to govern or to deliver information of governing nature, one will need to be closer to where events are present and where are happening. I'm going to understand why at some point of time it needed to become Buckingham Palace rather than Russia, and why it started to build its on-the-spot presence as well, because simply it needed to walk down among the people in order to let them know how things should be, and become beauty and beast protocol, where the beast of humanity or of the authority can be either way, will find its challenges. The authority to learn how to be more approachable, and to humanity to learn how to be more pure. Both of them can be beast or the beauty. If they're not moving towards each other, as the point is that that humanity move towards the standard, but standard should be understood. If it is standing too high as God in Vatican, it's hard to be understood what we are talking about. In Vatican, in churches, God is not reachable for the ordinary human. There's probably some kind of aristocratic version of human protocol, where it was never in perspective human to become a god. Now, when we are replacing it with protocol human, it's not like that anymore. Monarchy is about protocol human. And monarchy is not God, and it cannot handle itself as a God because it's not God. It is standard human and should be teaching humanity. That is where teaching element is happening. All over Britannia memorized as well. God is not reachable, but human is not God. But human also does have its house of correctness, right? House of upper values. That is what previously would have been called house of God. Today we are replacing it with house of human protocol. And then it's not anymore that it's not reachable. As today there are that much universities out there and standard bodies and so on, and people are reaching fantastic results. Teaching does matter and does have effect upon humanity. And so good family and kids brought in good family does make results. To make a civilization does make sense. to maintain families and societies and states does make sense. To manage planet as association of states does make sense. What was missing is noticing things in most correct terms. As much as we need to bring the house seems obviously closer to human rather than away of human, I'm going to find therefore need that we return in England with President Putin and with Russia and with House of Romanovs as well. And challenge the throne with this work. Accordingly, Macedonia wants to say there is Alexander, something as Alexander as well. Alexander exists as a son to me. Alexander is more on the executive levels, as I can see him enjoying very much to play politics today rather than to chart it. Alexander is rather dynamic and also obviously is much younger in his overall genetic configuration. So it is more energetic and require much more some kind of social interference. He is more on the level of politics. Well, what I'm doing here is political philosophy. We are not same energies. And you will notice here that rightfully it was recognized in that historic event, real or fake, that actually it was first, obviously our first parents. In this case scenario, I would be speaking of Olympia, mother, and then its son. And it goes equally in its metaphysical manifestation. First is political philosophy and conceptual thinking and regulative, constitutional regulative, and then it is specific politics. If we understand it more as a predatory charting its territories, then you're still going to miss the protocol human and governing protocol human, which is more sooner or later going to bring you to questioning not only a father but also a mother as well, especially if you are named Macedonia. What kind of Macedonia you would be if you would not be questioning mother as well? There is no such thing as Alexander before to speak about mother and father. Or even if you want to see yourself only as a land of Alexander, then you would understand that you exist as a land of son, but not of parent. I'm going to find parenthood very much, really, my side of story, very much having that very strong Russian sense, Russian sentiment, obviously very much bringing also Far East influences. Entire Asia here also you can notice is present. And in that context I wanted to say also how important it is to understand that Russia also somehow associates or relates rather to Asiatic countries, which I'm going to understand as a additional qualitative dimension in its size. Again, I'm reaching here the space or size of its representation, and why it is easier to be world when you are in Russia than you are elsewhere. So that Asiatic element, including Far East countries, is well incorporated in the bloodline, as you can notice. And I can't say enclosing therefore the Nordic element as well. And I can't see any other parenthood of Alexander, but exactly that one, Macedonian. You will notice, I hope, that I'm perfectly right here. And therefore, Alexander was not attacking Middle East. No, Jovanovic is right. He was just visiting his kingdom, the kingdom of his father, who would be sitting somewhere, obviously, in Babylonia. And it's the most logical explanation of how things are to the present days. You have rather synchronicity of these territories that continue to function as a family to such an extent that you have problem to understand where on earth is the conflict here. When you rather notice a family. And I really don't know what certain Central European countries are trying to play out. First of all, Alexander was mega protocol. And now we find ourselves in Little Britain. Again, I'm going to reach metaphysical element. Things in Britain becomes little because you end up to be much more specific when you are on lands like that. You end up to be in some kind of theater. And theaters usually are small, especially in earlier times, they would be of little people. Theaters in previous times would have been little houses, and people there would be little people. And traditionally, movie stars even nowadays are little people, you will notice. It reminds me altogether to Britannia, and it is another metaphysical element. But Britannia is theater, and that is why it is little. It is like lecture number 2 in metaphysics. I hope it's not going to scare you away. But it's my way of how I would see that. I think there are even more serious books. You can find even on Instagram occasionally people are bringing such narrative, such writings nowadays. You can understand the entire universe as a metaphysical event, and I truly believe, although it is rather scary, it is like that. But the fact is that our normal state of mind is that we function within our protocol. And how this would work is that each time when you think of science, and when you need to think about these matters that are around you, that you, now that we are much more in that respect knowledgeable, and that understand on better terms how that surrounding works. And of course, more pages will need to be written in that direction when time comes. I'm going to see a matter of urgency regulating the crowd now, this entire rather overclogged situation that we have, which is more on a position of some kind of inflammation. And when you have inflammation, that is where you should be instantly present and paying the most attention. Our civilization, our world today is in some kind of state of inflammation. And that's why our attention is now going in that direction. Once we relax and we resolve that inflammation, I'm very sure we will have much more space to devote ourselves to our next level issues. As of today, as of now, right now, if we manage just to bring ourselves on this level where I am bringing this work, I believe we would put ourselves in correct path of getting out of the previous troubles and getting ready for next level realizations. As much as we are going to find out, you're going to find that situation as protocol within the protocol. Like, again, example with Russian babushkas, protocol within the protocol. We should also understand how these protocols relate to each other. And that's critically important, that you understand how this protocol slide one into another and how they connect one to another, or how they should be respectful to each other, because we talk about coexistence of the protocols. Protocols coexist. Theater is a protocol, but it is not a state. Theater still exists within the state, and theater should respect protocol state. Protocol theater should respect protocol state, as protocol state should respect protocol planet, as protocol planet should respect or acknowledge protocol solar system, and should behave respectfully rather than to upset or usurp protocol solar system, as it happened in the previous eons, where two planets got into fight and collision, or it was collision in question. I think it was fight rather, disrespecting the solar system. Today, when two nations go into fight, they are disrespecting planetary system. If theater and state get into fight, they disrespect state system. Or if you want to talk about the kind of humans, I think it is equally as a food we eat related to living space, or how much there is a space, and we are talking here time dimension as well. And I think that it has to do something with energy configuration, that, by the way, also in certain in end line configure our body. Now imagine if people ended up for a longer period of time, and in earlier times they have been living not only in caves but also under the ground. How much one can afford going tall when living under the ground? I think that affects the size of humans. It just genetically crafted them into that format. I believe into that kind of explanation. And also, when you have everything exists in some kind of larger spaciousness, you can see even plants grow bigger, animals are bigger, and humans are bigger, because the overall ambience of the entire flora and fauna is happening of larger space and grow larger. Simply, this bioenergy simply fills the space available within that kind of energetic configuration. Well, I really think that it is up to energetic vibes as well, which define, which communicate on the level of our human body configuration. And that is where we end up talking about frequencies, and you go further in speaking about intensity of the energy impulses, and so on and so on and so on. But again, I'm going to talk that we end up talking about configuration as a planetary configuration altogether. And that is where metaphysical again is reaching altogether, because it becomes play of electromagnetic impulses, intensity as well of electromagnetic impulses becomes determinator of the shapes of life forms on the planet as well. It is altogether one energetic protocol, a planet with its different regions, and regions affecting the flora and fauna as well. That's going to explain the size of the human as well. As I'm going to find it rather pointless to talk about extraterrestrials when we have such biodiversity, such diversity in flora and fauna on the planet. You have on the planet different size of plants and different size of animals as well. And it's just the way how energy, life energy on this planet function, what protocol it's using, into what protocol belongs, to what protocol belongs. So, to recognize the existence of small people, I have nothing against it. I don't know why they should not be existing and living among the rest of the people. And why they should be hiding. I don't think that they should be hiding. I don't think they should be discriminated. I don't think they should be pushed to live under the ground. I think that they should be living with the rest of the people. I have to notice also, I have never been paying attention to the size of of human. Somehow, because I'm obviously sensitive person, I was rather reaching for the character of a person. I want to see beyond the physical attributes. I was never paying on first hand attention to physical features. I would always pay attention to character of a person. And that is why very often I would not notice physical features. They would not play. I'm very sure most of the people are like that. Well, depends now. Is there critical momentum? I mean, if someone is tall like 50 centimeters, you're not going to ignore it. And there is critical momentum where you can't avoid noticing something. But if it is reasonable, something in that is not going to that much catch your attention, you notice what you notice. You notice a person first. There would be a critical momentum. I don't know, should I say more about what more I can say about it? It should not be politicized. It should not be paid too much attention. Doesn't have really that much of a weight. When it doesn't have a weight, when it does have a weight, then does have a weight. How you deal with it? Well, obviously, people should tend to gather in a similar, always tend to gather in similar groups where they find themselves belonging, or where they are more accepted, or where they can be aligned. So obviously living in its own communities is the best way to deal with that situation, and simply not be annoyed by anyone else's existence, because anyone else is much more focused on themselves. That's tendency of humans. They're much more focused on themselves, and they just tolerate coexistence because they would not think that it has to do very much with what they think about it, or should they even think anything about it. They would not bother even to think anything about it if they don't have to think. Humans would not think more than they should. They should think. Humans tend to be a bit lazy, and they would not bother themselves more with something if they don't have to be bothered. So if they don't have to be bothered with you, they're not going to be bothered with you. So mostly humans ignore or tolerate things as long as it doesn't attack them directly, doesn't bother them directly, doesn't annoy them directly. And so if everyone keeps to its song, its protocol, its coexistence, everyone should be fine. Now, well, it's cultural settings. That is something you should work on. That's not biological, that's cultural. It is probably because they have been, this is where you need to bring, usually you bring, you need to, send them the role models that are going to reconfigure them. You need to use protocol role models or protocol teaching. If they are not easy to teach, then you should send them role models that they are going to follow. Usually, if they are more gangy, they're going to function on the role model. Gangs, you can completely take over a gang by sending them a role model. They're going to be defeated completely. Like in sport, for example. You know, that's how crowd function. Give them a role model. They're completely in awe to you. They completely become on their knees. That is how God worked with humanity. Give them a role model, and you can, I'm not going to say control them, but you can certainly influence them, and you can accomplish certain cultural improvement. You can influence them, and then you can culturally update them, and then they're not going to be problem anymore. You bring the subject matter as you're dealing with a sickness, and then your goal is to eliminate the sickness. Like any other sickness, you have to defeat it. The sickness, not the people. You don't end up killing the patient, but the sickness. Oh, that's how government of society looks like. That's what governing is. You deal with the sickness, not to kill the people around, but then you're governing. You kill the people. What kind of governing that is? And I'm going to conclude, if things have not been like that in all of the times, that is because people simply do not think how important is the governing function. And that is from positions that I today handle this work and where I brought this work. People simply have not realized, and I really don't know what really can be a reason, probably hypnotized by the religion, should I say, hypnotized by their own competitive and rather vandal nature, egocentric, should I say, or egoistic, predatory, survivory, competitive, greedy, very often, or just preoccupied with daily living and easy to accept the upper management without questioning it. Very often bots manipulated, away from thinking properly about these matters. But now that all of this has been brought to our attention, I'm very certain that people are going to start thinking about all of this differently, and that we are going to simply bring this missing part of our civilizational configuration. The missing part is nothing less but the very top of the pyramid. All the way to America, Masons are openly suggesting out there that the pyramid is having its detached and missing part. And then we end up talking about, some kind of Vietnam veterans and hippies. Also, obviously, they have the mother and the father and the grandfather and the grandmother, and things there also can get sharper and much more defined and much more specific and much more configured and much more meaningful and much more scientific, rather than that much loose. When it is everything driving on kids level, like as America and West, most of the time we're driving on kids level, you get into impression that there is nothing beyond it. Even kids get into impression there is nothing beyond it. And as they suffer, no one wins there. Kids are suffering, and territories are still beheaded. That is where we are right now. Kids are suffering and territories are beheaded. And also I'm going to ask religious houses to notice that they have been taking a bit more space and suffocating human and protocol human itself. And that they have been replacing protocol human with protocol God. And it looks so far, far away, as monarchies and aristocrats obviously want it to be. I don't know how far I can step into the past, and how much I'm rather supposed to pull it out from its mud, bringing updated and more complex version of the previous. It might be found sharper on the top rather than the previous monarchies as well, where the philosophy is before to be poetry or music of ultimate sensitivity. But no, I can't also understand Russia as one prototype of a person. For me, Russia is part of that entire region. And it does bring, Russia is capable to bring much more complex identities. As much as the region to which it belongs, it is complex. Let's allow us to think straight. Complex region delivers complex characters. There is no need to oversimplify such large territories, as we are going to visit Miss Universe competition. I'm not talking about Miss Universe competition here. I'm talking about complexity of historic houses and historic heritage protocols in all of the times of existence of certain regions, in millenniums of times, and how human would end up to be crafted on such regions, and what you get out of it. That is heritage house in its ultimate complexity, not in its ultimate simplicity. If distance and space is what I'm looking for, which I can't find somewhere in Greece anymore, not in the way how I need to deliver it, to notice a space. In Greece, you don't notice space. In Greece, you notice tourism destination. You become specific in the way how you become specific in Britannia, in England. You become tourist there as well. And it becomes about life itself. And it becomes about the food, about the sights, about and the language becomes all that life is about. And they are very good in delivering that world to its senses. The food is gorgeous, the sight is gorgeous, the temperature is gorgeous, the sentiment of being in the summer conditions. It doesn't urge you to bring this level of conversation, isn't it? Simply, it doesn't work like that. Maybe at earlier points of time where the lands have not been that much populated. Also, even then, and the ancient history of ancient Greece is full about fighting of various tribes with each other. And even if these philosophers happen down there, most of them have been men of older age. Really, I can't find too much metaphysics in that region about what I do here. again, I'm going to say this is profoundly, I jump completely in different kind of state of mind, and it is rather really metaphysical. When I talk about my Russia, I really speak about that level that you bring in music, for example, how you find it manifested in music that is Russian music, for example. Or when you are doing architecture in Russia. I'm talking about that sentiment that inspires that you somehow mentally configure it into it, and that dimension allows you, I'm going to argue, to notice the world not through the prism of or some little houses and little tribes fighting with each other about its own benefits and advancing one over another, but noticing the world in the size and shape of continents. Accordingly, we live such times where I'm going to say again and conclude with how I started this specific writing of today, and that is, we live in times where we have to notice art again. And if I have noticed it as a matter of my rather more inclined perspective, then it is genetics. If it is genetics, then it is crafted in a combination of purity and sizability of the space itself. My mega approach, I'm very sure now, has been identified properly. It is Nordic, but it is also Russian. Because of this soulness, because of the soulness and the purity, rather than aggressiveness and arrogancy. I really truly believe that playing history in its most authentic and organic way can only bring beneficial results for all of the regions, including Western. What I don't like, especially about Western regions, is disconnect that becomes symptomatic actually, and the reason why West finds itself in turbulences as of how it is today. First of all, not understanding or disassociating, disconnecting from any promise, any ability to understand the world itself. And accordingly being very easy to end up being manipulated as how it is manipulated. On the other side, also allowing to various illegal events to take place and to grow on such soil that end up being rootless, and as such allowing a variety of negative events to get planted there, because the entire environment doesn't have its criteria. The socio-cultural, socio-political environment doesn't have its criteria, and it becomes easy soil for planting variety of randomly generated seeds, which very often end up to be various oligarchies and various criminal groups. You can't build a world or top it up without following its own protocols. You find yourself in the nature, but you understand everything in nature is a protocol. And we as humans, we are a protocol. Politics is a protocol. Society is a protocol. Culture is a protocol. Nothing exists in isolation. We can't understand cultures or history of society as some kind of isolated events. No, we can't do that. When you already have a protocol, you can't play God when we are already God crafted. God is sun energy. You can't go over it. You can only disassociate yourself with it, and you end up being a sickness, dysfunctionality. As I have called you now, some kind of inflammation. That is where you end. Being being not synchronized. Being not synchronized end up with dysfunctionality, and you end up to be isolated as troubled area yourself. However, I really wanted to talk rather on the other side of the equation, and that is what good, that I really believe that returning Russia to Europe and to the world itself can only result in better understanding of how regions coexist and how they have been coexisting in all the times without, and then without that much of aggressiveness or animosity or torturing people moving on such large scale around the planet. Actually, just to focus on synchronization of the regions and understanding of the regions and understanding the correlation of the regions is going to bring better results for our overall recovery. As for example, bringing Russia in Europe, where and in with the rest of the countries in Europe and in Asia, will first of all make all of the regions to understand that there is something like Russia above your heads, as for example Middle East. And ignoring Russia is not exactly the way how Middle East can be Middle East. Middle East can never be enough Middle East if Middle East ignore Russia. Equally as Europe will never be Europe enough if Europe ignore Asia, and if Europe ignore Russia, and if Europe ignore to notice how Asia gradually becomes Europe, and how Russia gradually becomes Europe, or becomes Eastern Europe, or becomes whatever becomes, without noticing how that's being reflected within the population, you end up to be isolated clown yourself, isolated replica of what you really are, and that is simply wrong. As good as example, I'm going to take out here Macedonia, how far Macedonians have completely lost any orientation whatsoever, who on earth they are and what on earth that country is. First of all, it cannot be ignored that Macedonia is not a Nordic country, but Macedonia is a country that actually connects very much Asia with Europe, as entire line where basically Asia becomes or transit into Europe. This is the boundary line, somehow artificially designed. And as we know, in real life, things doesn't happen artificially lined like that. You can't line people like that. That is simply wrong. But the political stages end up to function exactly like that. And all of the Europe, I'm very sure, end up thinking of Balkan, for example, as something that's being lined up, and where Europe also ends up to be lined up. And that is simply wrong. That is very much artificial creation of nations. I'm going to therefore point out how far Macedonia itself reflects entire Asia, and entire history of Macedonia was always very much associated to Asia, as much as it was associated to Europe. And even more, it is opened to Asia than to Europe, because Europe was very much restrictive at the point where it started to build its aristocratic history, its Renaissance-driven history. It became much more scientific, become much more intelligent, much more intellectual. It was more about selecting, appointing people would have been, in order to advance in Europe, the criteria would be higher. And it was somehow borderline how far Eastern population can go on territories where criteria and standards of someone's engagement are ultimately higher. And logically, our territories would be much more oriented towards Asia. So the fabric of these territories profoundly reflect Asian continent. And it is absolutely irrational to understand them differently and to use them in any different manner, but rather to simply comprehend how they are, and what Europe ultimately becomes today, because does have some kind of here information which will need to be noticed. How Asia exists and how Asia gradually becomes Europe. How Asia gradually becomes Europe. United, of course, together with European tribes. But it is very wrong to understand that history of Europe in any of the times would be so much drawn like with some kind of lineage, with some kind of artificial line drawn out there between the two continents. Some kind of wall being set out there. What this ultimately also brings forward is necessity that Euro-Asian continent start functioning as Euro-Asian continent rather than playing Cinderella. As at the moment I have to notice, Europe is playing nothing else but Cinderella to Asia. Now, in order that we get out of such kind of protocol, we need to Euro-Asia will need to happen. And Euro-Asia will need to start thinking as Euro-Asia. I mean, you can still perfectly function as there are different suburbs in a city. There are different suburbs, right? Well, that is how Euro-Asia will be noticed as well, in certain perspective, as different suburbs. That we have its own authenticity, its own identity, but in substance, they're also making a whole of something. And that whole of something is Euro-Asia. And why is that important? Because you end up thinking how you are going to not just synchronize all of that, but also drive it to its best realization. Because at the end, any governor would like to see its city being taken care of properly. That is to take care of any kind of suburb, doesn't matter of diversity, to take care upon its own authenticity, but still that you want to see them functioning in the best possible way without confronting each other, without damaging each other. That's the ultimate law here of synchronicity. You cannot have damaging element, but you have actually supportive element, coordination and supporting is co-functioning in certain whole event. Eurasia will need to coexist and co-function for the benefit of all of the units of Euro-Asian continent. That is, each part of Euro-Asian continent will need to function to its best of realization, so entire Euro-Asian continent is going to benefit out of it and it's going to go in its desired direction. Without too much interfering, but respecting each other and ultimately providing, of course, stage for the best functions, because somehow always, in the recent time as well, the headquarters end up to be where is diplomacy. Although arguably Eurasia will need to have its own diplomacy, I'm going to find Russia is the best diplomatic center for Eurasia. It is Putin, but also there is foreign affairs minister. It's going to remind you there is Asian element to Russia. And that's the same story you find in Macedonia. Macedonia is European, but there is very strong Asian element in Macedonia. As much as there is substantial Asian element in Serbia as well. and you have to be an idiot not to notice it. There is Asian element all the way to Austria. There is Asian element all the way to Central Europe. Auto becomes a bit more filtered. But there would have been Asian element. There would have been India element all the way to England. Now what that indicates that you become locked in some kind of synchronicity and coordination. Not as a negative word, locked, but somehow, I'm going to say, relating to. And because you are relating to something, you become different. You need to notice the underlying protocol. The underlying protocol is not, I have crown with that many diamonds. What you're saying is, I am related to that region. Now, how far you can go ignoring what means related is another question. And should you be going away with it, or you should be on top of it? Should you be playing runaway bride or runaway Cinderella in this case scenario? Or you should be returning as what I have done this time, returning my back, looking at that Asian continent without being afraid of it, I have to say, and noticing the size of that event and noticing the beauty of it, and noticing the colors of it, and noticing its soulness and its humanity and its life, its presence, noticing these are just people as any other, and noticing how far we have so much to do there, and to bring that forward in the best possible way. And we become, I'm not going to say architects, but advisors if needed, or assistants to best, or teachers even, if that can be a case, or coordinators or whatever, but no architects. Because that's something that we should rather understand. Architecture is this energetic configuration, and we rather need to understand it. We can't be architects, or what already is architectured. We should rather understand it. And that is where you get measured, by how far you understand. That is how science exists. Science doesn't invent something. They understand something, and it's wow, because that scientist understood something. That is science. Science is our next understanding of something. That's why I'm going to call my work science, because I with my work, I understood something, and I'm bringing it to you, and I'm sharing it with you, what I have understood. But that's not architecting something. That is understanding. And that is the highest scale of our accomplishment. That is what top of the humanity is accomplishing. Pay attention. Not architecturing, but understanding. That is how I find exactly myself now, turning my back somewhere from position of Buckingham Palace, and looking at this Asia and saying, wow, look at that. And we have been running away from it. Wow, what a bunch of folks. All in the way how it has been noticed, I'm going to argue. It was rather about to go and damage something and usurp and misuse something than understand that these are people of blood, people of soil and soul. People of soul. And I have understood that by living in Macedonia, where half of my family is profoundly Asiatic. And when I understood that when you have that in your family, you understand it is just another human, a human that you find actually much more warm and much more caring and much more intelligent, actually. and bring much more of a mental dimension that my uncle could have bring to me, that I can sense it. Although my father would have been bringing it in different way. My father was much more artistic, and my uncle was much more kind of sober level of intelligence, like pragmatically intelligent. But you can notice dimension in these people. You notice the space in these people, and they have been in your family, and that is why it helped me. That it helped me very much, that family out of which I have been born, to notice Asia, not only Central Europe and Germany. Certainly, I noticed it first again. I think that equally, I have been speaking about my grandfather and my uncle with enough respect, and the fact that I have noticed that Asia, in its beauty, in its soulness, in its sensitivity, in its humanity. And if whatever is not good there is because you have been allowing yourself to be rather bored and wasting time somewhere in England than going and solving problem as a real man and as a real woman. And if you today want to, or is ambition, or our ambition, to declare higher grade, now let's be sure that it is really higher grade in solving problems. Or what else it would be about? Or what else is left out there to conquest? If not to solve our problems.